Okay, we'll get started then. So, welcome to this session. It's going to split up into 3 parts, basically, which is the title. It's what is the Fediverse, what sort of sites there are, what sort of content the use is, and so forth. And then I'm going to get a bit more technical, and that's the ActivityPub bit. And there'll be a bit of JSON. I'll explain it all. And then, and also all the way through it, I'm going to kind of talk about why this would be a great fit for Drupal and how it does actually work for Drupal. And if anyone is following the live stream, or if you want to actually be able to see the code samples in detail, the slides without the nice pen background are up on ekes.gitlab.io, so the GitLab pages, Drupal-ActivityPub-presentation, and I'll leave them there. And when I update, that's the main branch of the Reveal.js thing. And when I update them, the updates go into the main branch. So this is just a branch for this particular presentation. But before I kick off, a quick introduction. So I'm ekes on just about every platform, Drupal.org, Slack, on various bits of the Fediverse, on Matrix, and then it's the systemly.org one that you can find me on. And I've been working with Drupal for quite a long time. The thing that's been keeping me busy for the last couple of years has not been the Fediverse. It's been working with Local Gov Drupal, which is a really great project. There's like tens of councils in the UK that are working together, so they have to decide what their priorities are and all the rest of it. And there's several agencies working on it as well. So it's really interesting, actually. There are components you can use on your website, but it's actually really interesting on a organizational level about how these councils, Gementa, can share their code and make decisions and things like that. And there's some presentations from DrupalCon, the last European one, if you're interested in that kind of thing. Anyway, so for the presentation itself, the Fediverse. So this is where I'm going to ask you, how many people kind of have a vague idea what the Fediverse is? Just a few people. And anyone actually use anything in it? Yeah, okay, yeah. That's kind of what I expected. I'm not the most social person on that sense, so I don't use it so much, but I will say why I think it's really important and it's really useful for Drupal, and it's not just about the social stuff as we're going along in this talk. But yeah, so it's federated, which means you're sharing content between websites. It doesn't live in one place. And you also share reactions to that content, so comments, likes, invites, reactions, all that kind of stuff. So it has context. So the content doesn't have to live in one silo. The name is crap, at least in my view. It's clearly dreamt up by a geek, so it's this sort of federated universe or something like that. Another name that came up for it was Web0, if you know Arl, A-R.A-L, Arl Bunken. And it is really, you've seen all the blockchain hype about being able to distribute stuff between different sites and all the rest of it. We don't really need a ledger to remember everything ever for sharing content between sites and being able to react to it. In fact, you just need an agreed standard for pushing and subscribing to events and getting the information. So Web0, as he called it, is the decentralized web, which is definitely one of the ways that the web is going at the moment. So the most famous examples, I'm just going to run through some of the existing sites of the standard Fediverse, federated web. Most famous one is Mastodon. It's kind of like Twitter. So it's a micro-blogging site, and it's probably the most well-known because there's at least a few thousand instances of it around on the web. Each one of these instances, and you can go to one that sort of fits you, choose who they federate with so they can exclude instances they don't like. if you are interested in this sort of microblogging, one of the differences from Twitter, and certainly more than Facebook, and this is the same for most of this stuff, is it's not actually designed to make you doom scroll. It's not the whole it's not there. There isn't a large team of people working out how to make you, stay there and keep there. It's actually just for sharing content and communicating with people. So you actually have to make a bit of effort yourself to find the people you're interested in, find the topics you want to follow, and so forth. So one of the reasons that this kind of level of Fediverse, I will expand, is a bit unusual for people, is because it makes you make a bit of effort. But other than that, it works the same way. You can post on one instance, and anyone who's following it will see it on another instance, and they can react to you, and they can send private messages and things like that. But on that sort of social end of it, there are loads more of them. There's something called Pleroma, Friendica, Hubzilla. They tend towards the more Facebooky type of way of doing things. But they all distribute and talk to each other. And this is where we start going into more content-orientated platforms. Write Freely is literally just a blog, and it's designed to be a single-user blog. But the point is, people don't need to go to your blog to read your blog posts. They can subscribe to it, they can announce their interest, and they can get it and read it wherever they want to. But there's also Pixelfed, which is kind of Instagrammy. It's a photo sharing website. There's Peertube, which is a distributed kind of YouTube. It actually also uses torrents, and we'll see that later on. So you're sharing videos. This one is probably less well known, but I have an interest in sharing calendaring and events and invites, and getting away from having to go to Meetup, for example. So MOBILIZON is a new one that's been created, and you can subscribe to calendars, and they federate the events across each other. But there's loads more. There's Lemmy, which is a link aggregator. Bookworm, share book reviews. There's Funkwhale for your music. If you're interested in these particular platforms, there's something called Fediverse.party, which is probably the most accessible, nice website for finding these different sort of platforms and finding the one that might fit you or have similar people with similar interests to you. It's not always 100% up to date, but it's pretty good. So, as you'll see, they're all content driven, and a lot of my interest here is not on the social stuff so much, but actually on the content. So we'll take a step back from all this Facebook, Twitter style, social media stuff, and think more like this Write Freely blog, the Peertube video sharing, the MOBILIZON calendaring. They're all very different sites with very different content. So a blog, or the microblogging, is, it's a relatively simple piece of content. And here comes the first bit of JSON. I don't know if you'll be able to, you should be able to read that. It's super simple. It has a type, note, it has an ID, and you can see that it was published by Klausi, if you know from the Drupal community in Austria. So if you want to follow Klausi, it's on mastodon.social, and it has some straightforward content. And an image works in much the same way. You have an agreed way of marking up in JSON and sharing an image. This is output from Pixelfed, and there you go, it's a type image. It's really not very difficult, this. And a media type and a URL. It's starting to look kind of like the output from a media entity, to be honest. And a video, same thing again. Right, and this is where you get the idea that actually you can get a lot more information into it. And this is where, if I can scroll, you'll see I've actually simplified this. There's lots more information in there because they've extended the standard itself and added in stuff like where each one of the video instances can actually, if they're sharing it, can share the torrent of it so they can all see it. So you don't even need to have the full video on your site. You can stream it from the torrent, which everyone has pieces of. So they've extended it for that. And another thing you'll notice, where previously the post was attributed to Klausy, this one, who's an individual, this one is attributed to a group with an ID instead. So it's not just about sharing content from individuals either. So it's not this simple social media thing. This is where it starts to become more useful. So you can share blog posts, videos, pictures, events, and then the reactions to them and the comments and so forth. And we've seen the first taste of that JSON, and that content is federated across websites. Before I go into the detail of that, I'm going to take a step back and talk about how we've been doing this previously. And this is where I start to think it becomes exciting, not just for the way it's being used at the moment, but generally for federating content completely. I don't know if anyone has been trying to get content from one website to another website in the past, but we've been doing it with RSS, which is old, it's extensible. It does work quite well. It's extended for podcasts, so all the podcast feeds you're following, that kind of works. It's been extended for podcasts. It was extended for MRSS, Media RSS, for video. Less popular. Didn't really work. And how many people have used feeds in Drupal for pulling these sorts of things in? Nobody had this pain? Yeah. So what you have to do is, particularly if you're going from quite a lot of different sources, you've got to keep on polling every single one of these things constantly to see, is there a new thing? No, this feed hasn't changed. Is there a new thing? No, this feed hasn't changed. So for RSS, there was something called PubSub, where if you had an RSS feed, the PubSub hubbub would poll your feed, see if it had changed, and then people could subscribe to the hubbub, and they would get pinged if there'd been an update, at which point they could go and then pull the feed and get the update. Not really ideal. And for pushing, that's kind of covered your videos, your blog posts, articles, things like that. For events, we have iCal, and if anyone's had the misfortune to have to do with the iCal spec, 70-character line lengths with Microsoft carriage returns, and to push that around, well, quite often we email them. Like you email an event and then you email your response. Or otherwise you're having to poll again and again and again. And then otherwise you set up a custom API, don't you? So I'm sure plenty of people have created custom API endpoints to be able to share content out of their websites, but of course they don't necessarily integrate. And there's been some very good attempts to make this generalized. Does anyone remember Google Wave? No. Yeah. So, but they never quite took off. So why is this going to be any different? Well, it's actually already federated, and it's already working. And it's working on existing actual sites with the actual content. So here's my Pixelfed example. And I'm going to use Mastodon because it's probably the most advanced example. So on my Mastodon account, there is exactly the same content. If I follow that person, you can see the images and so forth. So across the platforms, we are already federating content and even different sorts of content. Mastodon, and this is how the spec is kind of explained, you kind of do your best interpretation of the data. So if If you don't know about images, you don't pull images. And it works for the video as well. So there's the videos, and there's the videos again on Mastodon. So people don't need to go to your site. They can actually have your content pushed to them wherever they want it. Or, more importantly, your site can have content pushed at it. And you can then have the content as and when it comes up and consume it and deliver it where it's needed. And after that, people can actually react to it in the same place. So it's already federating, sharing content between sites. And this is where it starts to get more interesting, it's already been written in Elixir, Go, Java, JavaScript, PHP, Python, Ruby, Rust, which means there are existing implementations that work. Most of them are open source. You can read the code. And there are libraries out there. So if you go to Packagist, there's libraries for being able to consume and use this. So we're developers. We're lazy. It's likely that things will get implemented if it's easy to do so. And it's becoming much, much easier to do so because there are so many implementations already. And they're all talking the same language. And so it's easier to share the content between the two different places. And what is this language? How are they talking? And this is where we come to ActivityPub. And there are some additional things that I will come in, so I say friends. ActivityPub itself is also a slight misnomer. There's 3 W3C standards for this, and they really overlap. So while I'm going through it, I might say, you know, this is definitely ActivityPub, this is Activity Vocabulary, but it's all, you know, one thing. And also, while I talk through them, I'm going to suggest why this might map really nicely to Drupal. So, and this is the really ActivityPub spec bit of it. They even split it up into the social bit, and this is the spec, what the spec says. This is the social bit, which is when the client's talking to the server, and then the federation is when the servers are talking to each other. So this is sites sharing content. But once you look at it, it will look very similar to any HTTP protocol you're ever used to. You know, it's posts and gets. What's new is this concept of inbox and outbox, and this will come up from here on in. But there's always an actor, and we'll be talking about actors as well as this goes along. So the actor was Klausy, but the actor was also the group that posted that video. And then they can talk to their inbox and outbox on a server. And then the federated bit is where the server can talk to other servers out there. With it also has an inbox and an outbox for sending and collecting the content. And the two together then become the full specification. So that's kind of the first part of how it's communicating, which is classic HTTP, but with endpoints for these inboxes and outboxes. What they're talking is actually the JSON I was showing is JSON LD, which is also a W3 spec or a recommendation, if strict. And if you request it, you will not be able to see that in the dark background. Both those two things are representations of the same URL. One of them's requesting anything, or HTML. The second one is requesting activity plus JSON. If people have followed the discussions around when the REST API in Drupal was implemented, the decision was not to do the vary on the same URL based on the accept header, but to have different URLs. But then JSON API, the decision, because of the specification, if I recall, is that you do have the same URL. But for ActivityPub, it doesn't matter. You can do either as long as you specify where the endpoint is. But this one switches based on the accepts header. And then the LD bit of it is linked data. If this rings horrible alarm bells from people who used to like XML and RDF and it breaking, the nice thing is it's JSON. And people read it more liberally. So while there is a context that says, and it makes it extensible, there is a context that says, you know, all these things are in this namespace and there's another namespace. When it's actually read, almost all the parsers, everything that reads it, are just really liberal, and they just read, I know I'm expecting an ID, I'm expecting an image, and also, and it just doesn't explode like XML RDF does, which is good. And again, that's what makes it more popular. It's much lighter, it's much easier to produce, and much easier to consume. So, that's how it's being communicated. What is being communicated? And this is largely, this is where we start to go into the activity vocabulary bit of the specification. And there are three primary types of objects that are being communicated. Objects are relatively simple. So there's the context, which is the namespace. They always have an ID, which is where you can find them. And they have a type, you know. And then they're starting to look very much like entities in Drupal, really. They have properties on them. They can also have links with them, which is kind of part of the linked data thing. This is your entity reference field, and you can have just the entity reference field pointing to where it is, or you can have a representation of the data. And if anyone has written Symfony serializers, it's very normal in the serializer. It will just go, and then you write a serializer for the entity reference field, and you just go into the entity reference field, and you can include it in line. So we've kind of got entities, and we've got a standard way of representing them. And we've got, this is the other sort of general object we have, which is a list, which is very much like views, to be honest. It's the output of multiple of the objects. So, of the object types, there's three. One of them, important ones, which is different from most of the others, is the actor I've already kind of talked about. So it can be a person, but it can also be a group, or an application, or an organization, or a service. And the specification is really straightforward about this, and it's very clear. So it's not just around social interactions. It is also just for systems to talk to each other, to share content. And I suspect even on the social end, I think most Drupal sites tend not to have individual users that they're promoting, but you will actually want all your content editors to be able to push content out to all followers on behalf of the site or a part of the site. So that would be your application or organization. And yeah, the actor types are special because they have these inboxes and outboxes. So that's where you can go to find out, to ask to be followed, or where you go to find the content that's being pushed out. They also will, have followers. It's not necessary. You can actually implement the spec and not have anyone follow you, and people would just have to poll your outbox. But yeah, that kind of misses part of the point of being actually able to push the content to people that want it. And another one is they'll probably have keys, which I will come to in my live, not live demo. The second type group of object, I should drink something. The second type of object type is this content. So we've got articles, audio, documents. We've seen them all already in practice. The ones that we haven't seen that's slightly different, relationship, which is your classic linked data, object, subject, reference. I haven't actually seen that very much in use. And tombstone, which is really useful. In a list, if you've deleted content and you want to tell people you've deleted it, you just put the tombstone in. So there's an example of the object type of note we've already seen. And then the third type is basically your events in Drupal. It's the activity types, particularly create, update, delete. So you need to announce the fact that you want to create a piece of content, or you have created a piece of content, and the person following should also create the piece of content. And to make this actual, these have to go into the outbox to say that this has happened. So it's not quite entity revisions, because you need to have an entity to say this has been created. You need an entity to say this has been updated, this has been deleted. So that's a slight extension on what we've got going on in Drupal. But what you'll see is it's very simple. It's just a create that in fact links to the object that's being created. So there's your announcement that it's happening. And then there's loads of activity types. So if you're interested in doing events, there's the accept, ignore, invite, reject, reactions to the invite. There's various collection management, add, move, remove, and all the rest of it. But the essential ones: create, update, delete, and then of course follow and unfollow and deny people from following, for being able to pull in and find out who wants to get your pushed data. So I've already been talking about Drupal. What about Drupal? Well, when I proposed this talk, which was 2 and a bit years ago, there was nothing for Drupal. However, now, thanks to Sventel, Christoph, there is a module which has been developed. And this is my live, not live demo, because I do not trust myself to do a live demo. So I will step you through me doing my live demo of using the ActivityPub module and where it's up to at the moment. So we do have a user actor. It's attached to the user account. You can enable it on the user account. You can set up the bio on it. And if you want to have a look, the URL of this, I'll see it on one of the slides as we go along. I think is ap-test.iskra.net, and I've just set up. I just set up to do this on there, and there is a ActivityPub actor on there, and there is also on a Mastodon instance there is that Drupal user actor on a Mastodon instance. You'll see, and this is one of the slight confusions, Mastodon uses WebFinger, which is one of the additional friends technologies I mentioned. So rather than saying http://ap-test.iskra.net/user ekes, it says ekes at, which is slightly confusing, but that's just, and the Drupal module uses a WebFinger module to map the two, depending on whichever gets asked. So that's solved for you in any case. So one of the things that I said we just don't have yet in Drupal would be an inbox and outbox on the actor, which is the essential thing for being able to push and pull the content. Well, now we do. So there's that Drupal user on Mastodon, and I've clicked the follow button. And here in the Drupal website, and this is kind of a bit of the back end bit of the ActivityPub, you can see the activity And the one at the bottom is the request coming in from the Mastodon instance is framerpiaf.org. If anyone wants to correct my French, P-I-A-F. I don't know how you pronounce that. Has sent the follow request into into the Drupal website, and the Drupal website is then sent or is about to send an accept response that the follow has happened, and it's queued up. And so, and this is my live demo, not live demo breaking, because this really did happen while I was doing it. You need something to send out and send out all these push messages. So the way the module is installed at the moment, it either does it on cron or on Drush. I think it's an ideal opportunity if anyone wants to play with React PHP or some other asynchronous PHP to have a nice runner. That's how Mastodon does it. It actually has two services. It has a website and an asynchronous listening service that pulls things in, queues them up, and then runs them off the queue. You could do exactly the same thing in PHP. But at the moment, run the Drush job, and the Drush job will go to the outboxes and the queue and push the content off to the followers as is required, or whoever is the destination of the message. So I ran the Drush job, and you get lots of lovely red, because on the site I had not set up the private file directory, and the module stores the keys. I said I would come to the keys in the private files directory. So each one of the actors has to have a key. Otherwise, this is to authenticate the message. It works much the same as DKIM, if you've ever had the misfortune of dealing with email. You publish a public key, and then for the message that's going out, you take the field properties and you encrypt them and put a hash on it. And then at the other end, they can see your public key and see the hash messages and make sure it calculates out and know that it's come from where it says it's coming from and that it hasn't been tampered with on the way, which is basically to stop people being imposters and subscribing you to stuff or whatever. But I hadn't set up the private folder, so that failed. And you can see Framer has refused the message because it's not correctly signed, so it's 401 unauthorized. So I set up the private message, the private folder, it generated the keys, and then it sent it, and it's TO2 accepted. So the other end knows the follow works, so we can actually push messages into another site. And it works the other way, so I can follow that Mastodon user in my Drupal instance. And there you can see it coming up on the other end. And so that's your inbox, outbox associated with the user as an actor. It also works for content. And I'll show you how this gets mapped in a moment. But this is a node on the website, and it's been mapped to a note type, which is the sort of like short messaging kind of thing that you saw earlier on with Klausy. Here is the output, and so I'm running the drush command again manually with the full debug on. So you can see this is it. So I've got one follower, which is that Mastodon instance. I've posted this on the Drupal site, and so it's now going to push it out to the follower. You can see it's a create activity. Am I on it? Will it scroll? Yep. You can see it has the image attached to it, everything else, and you can probably see that it's going to get sent off out to that user. And if I scroll to the bottom, you'll see it gets pushed there, and there's a 202 response, which means it actually gets pushed into the other website. So you can push content out of Drupal into anything that talks ActivityPub. And there is that same content. you can see I mapped the summary to the body, and it doesn't accept HTML, so there was the p tags encoded in it. So when we get to the mapping, we need a better way of mapping the summary out of the body, you know, that subfield thing. Anyway, I can also reply to it. So I reply to that piece of content from the Mastodon account, and if you squint at the bottom, it's posted it as a comment underneath. So with the context of the thing, you can reply to the content, and it will be, so then the Mastodon instance has pushed it into the inbox of the Drupal website. The Drupal website has then changed it and turned it into content in Drupal. So, what objects have been implemented? So there were these sort of like 3 different types of objects, and there's, you know, fully extensible. Well, so far, the important ones, except has been done, the context, which is like in reply to what, delete, the follow, which we saw actually going on there, direct replies, undo requests, and then the note at the top there, which you're able to map to basically any entity type, although it's very much node-based at the moment. And you can't really see it, but that's the form, and you just have all for a note, you have all the properties of a note, and you can say which fields it maps to on a Drupal entity. And that's how it then decides how to map it onto the JSON LD, which is what then gets pushed. So whatever your entity is, you can do it. And it's a plugin system, so it should be straightforward enough to be able to put in a video or an event or any other type. It, at the moment, doesn't use the Symfony serialization system. I'm going to find out what the limits of that are. Particularly once I start looking at some of the more complicated, more extensible ones where you've got to have more namespaces and things, we will find out. But it works, and this is me requesting that node with the correct accept headers, and it does actually change it on the same URL and return the full JSON. So that works as well, out of the box. But it's a relatively new module. There's issues. That screenshot's actually from a month or so ago. Since then, I've put a couple of issues, and I've started working first on generalizing the actor context. So it's not just a user, it could be a group, or the site, or all the content admins of the site, which I think would be very useful for being able to push content around, for I think the way most of us use Drupal. So there you have it. We've got the Fediverse, which is for sharing the content, the social activity. It's got a clear but actually really flexible specification that people are already extending, and they're actually using, and they're actually sharing content between sites, and they're actually sharing the likes and reactions to it from. There's loads of libraries out there, so it becomes much easier to implement, and it's in lots of different languages. And there is an implementation already started for Drupal. So people should start trying it out and using it. And maybe, you know, if you just need to share content between a couple of sites, you can just do that already using this module. So that's that. I will do the sponsor slides first while we're here. I assume you've seen these before. I had to recreate them. There we go. So, are there any questions or thoughts or anything? Yes. Oh, the box, so that you're on the recording.
2 okay. So, do you have any examples of Drupal websites using the modules like in the wild? No. Okay.
Well, yeah. So the maintainer of the module who I kind of expected to be here, but isn't. Never mind. Does use it on his own website and actually has a really nice PWA and sort of web app, which is a reader, so that you can follow accounts, get stuff pushed into your Drupal website, and then you have like a single page web app that you can then use on your phone for following everything that you wanted. So that's very much the sort of social end of it on the user end. So you can have your own place that collects content from everywhere and use it and interact with it on your phone. As you might have noticed, that's not my first interest. I'm more interested in sharing stuff between the actual servers and things like that. But yeah, go out. That's a real thing that is really being used, but only by a few people.
Okay. Well, yeah. So it's really exciting to me, and yeah, I wanted to know if all the good things that came of it, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. So I have one website that has to go Drupal 9. Although they made it easier by extending Drupal 7 again, which should be at least pushing and pulling events out of it by the end of the year. Okay. We will be there.
So, any other? Yeah.
So I've seen there's types of actors, application, and service. What are the difference between those? You know.
I can't remember where it was. Anyway, yeah, so why are there the different types? Well, the biggest difference is like Mastodon will treat anything that's an application as a bot. So it will really just assume that it's not. That's the biggest.
So for example, if you want to pull content from Twitter, it will be an application,
and it will know that it's not something that it will react to. It flags it up differently. Other than that, it's just within the specification. I don't know if there's any strict rules or additional properties for these different things. But you do, in pragmatic terms, you do actually want to have, like within Drupal, different types of actors, because while it's attached to the user, and this is what I'm presently unpicking, all the permissions management has to be around the user, whereas now if you want to be able to do it on a system level for all the users who are of the role content editor, you need to make it I'm making a new bundle of the actor, and then making the permissions management pluggable so that all users with this particular permission can do it, or using groups module, all members of the group could do, so forth. And then the fact that it then fits so neatly into existing types that you can announce this is what my actor is kind of cool, really.
Yeah, I mean, I see it as a family of modules already. There is infinite possibilities. Like, I don't know, you can, the permissions that you said, who can follow the instances that you connect to, no? Is already implemented, for example, the instances that you allow to interact with in the Drupal module?
Yes, there are exceptions. Okay. Yeah, so you can say that you don't want to talk to any of the nasty, racist, weird and wonderful sites that are floating
the Trump
out. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. If anyone does want to ask any other questions, there we go. Like I say, I'm ekes on most of the things. I'm also in the sprint room, actually working on that particular issue that I just mentioned. And I've now got a reasonably good idea of exactly how the module has been put together by Christoph, so I can kind of explain how it's working and how things could be different. And the issue queue has been well used, so it really does describe what's still missing and what could be added and so forth. So yeah, I would say get started and just see if you can share content between a couple of sites without having to use bloody RSS.